Good afternoon. Good afternoon and happy Halloween to those who celebrate Happy Hallelujah Day, Harvest Festival, and all of the things. My name is Chrissy Thornton, and I'm so glad to be joining you on behalf of Associated Black Charities for October's Equity at Work webinar. Today, we are going to talk about fair hiring practices. And this webinar series is meant to tackle the hard and sometimes taboo discussions around workplace discrimination. So we know that ensuring fairness in hiring is critical to fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace, particularly for Black professionals. By implementing equitable hiring practices, organizations can, of course, create an environment where every candidate, regardless of their background, has an equal opportunity to succeed. By taking intentional steps, such as mentorship programs or ensuring transparent promotional pathways, companies and organizations can empower all of their employees, but specifically Black employees, to thrive at every level. I'm so excited to talk about this topic today, and we have some valuable guests with us on the line, and I'd like to welcome them on screen with me at this time. Hello, I'm so excited to have you, Tanika Craig Curtis, with us on the webinar today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're hoping that Nat Alston, who's also scheduled to be with us today, can join, but we're going to move ahead. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your great work, but also why this particular topic not only resonated with you, but is so important today.
Awesome. So, as you stated, I am Tanika Craig Curtis. One of the things that I do in my day job is I help returning citizens reintegrate back into the community. And this topic is very important to marginalized populations like formerly incarcerated individuals, because they face complex barriers than a regular person just applying for a job. And then there are also reasons that I love this topic is because in all of my roles, I've had some touch points in HR, and I have a good gut feeling about people normally. And so even when I was a receptionist, my boss would come out and say, "What did you think about that candidate?" So if I had to give advice to any candidates, like, your interview starts when you get out of your car. And I would give my little tidbits thinking, oh, it's minimum, but sometimes that was the deciding factor of whether that person was hired or not. And so when you think about going about in your life, there's always going to be pivots and transitions. And at some point in time, you're going to land yourself looking for a job. COVID proved us all that that could happen to any of us, no matter what your position is. And so if you haven't interviewed in a long time, things are virtual now, where in person you would be shaking hands, sweaty, worrying about if your hair is right, if you're saying the right things, or being judged, or if you have any insecurities about your gaps in your employment. Those things all run through your head. And you hope that the employer will take that into consideration on a human level. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. They have some biases that we've all probably experienced, whether it's gender, race, even if you're a low skilled, high skilled, overqualified, underqualified, and all of those things and thoughts run through your mind. And so it's up to organizations to give people a fair slate when they're coming in, no matter what the situation is that lands them looking for a job.
Thank you for that. And welcome, Nat. Nice to see you on today's webinar.
Oh, good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your background, and then also why you think this topic about fair hiring practices is so important.
Well, probably my background is quite extensive, and I know they probably looked at it on the webinar here, but I've been in human resources for well over 40 plus odd years, definitely in that C-suite level. I've also had a consulting firm for about the last 24 years. And basically, in terms of fair and equity as it relates to people of color, I agree with Tanika there. Biases are always there, and I usually tell people like hires like. And if we're not at that table from the talent acquisition standpoint, the mentoring, and even at that C-suite standpoint, we're going to run across a lot of biases in there. And as chairman of the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources, for the last 25 years, we've addressed that throughout our entire organization. And basically, race definitely there, gender is also there in terms of our biases, and that's been historically there for a long, long time. That's where we started off with affirmative action, and now we've got into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the so-called political climate out there has weaponized the DE&I, just like they did affirmative action when I started way back when. So we've always had that type of discrimination, biases once the person got in there. And we've had people like myself and others that have been in the corporate world for quite some time. And we've had to overcome those barriers, making sure that we create an environment for people to enter, but at the same time, navigating it ourselves to get to that level where we can make a difference and reaching back in there. So this is an appropriate topic now, just like it has been in the past. And I foresee it possibly even being still in the future.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk today a little bit about different types of hiring practices that are unfair, that disproportionately affect specifically Black people and Black communities. But we know that there are inequities in recruitment, in candidate journeys, in interviewing, in onboarding and orientation, in resourcing once you're in the company, and then ongoing through your evaluation and promotional process. So it just seems like sometimes almost a losing battle in traditional organizations that are not committed to equitable and fair practices for Black people and other marginalized people on jobs. We know there's a racial wealth gap, as you've spoken to. We know that there are barriers to advancement, specifically for Black people. There's a statistic that says only 7% broadly in the United States of managerial roles are occupied by Black professionals, even though we make up around 14% of the workforce at entry levels. And so this represents a gap in upward trajectory or mobility in positions. So how big of an issue is this really?
Tanika, you want to take that, or I can come back and answer it? I would say, if you want, from a business perspective, it is very large. And I say that from the standpoint of the number of people of color in the CEO positions. Because on the business side of it, that's where it starts. If we've got people of color at the top, and I'm always thinking about a person that did a t-shirt and she said, we want to have a seat at the table, we want to be in the room, and we want to be on the call. Well, if we're not on the call or at the seat at the table in the room, then as I said earlier, like hires like. And if we're not represented in there and there's another race, they're going to hire who? From their own race. They're going to help that person navigate, which we've seen the history and statistics there. So we've got to really break those barriers. And then once we get there, that's the other side of the coin. Once we get there, we've got to reach back. And sometimes I'll be very straightforward and candid. We can be our own worst enemy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we get there and guess what? I've got mine, you get yours. I'm not going to help you navigate. I'm there, got all the egos and the perks, but we don't set up any rules or, shall we say, changing the culture so we can open up those doors. So what I've seen over the years is on both sides, people that have taken that risk, gotten to that top, and basically want to open up that pipeline for that. But that takes a very long time to change the company's culture to get to that. Because yes, I'm at the top, but now, and I've been at C-suite level, it takes years to go back down and start restructuring that culture so we can have people who look like the three of us move up that ladder, move up that door. And so they have an opportunity to open the door and help them to navigate. So sometimes we can be our worst enemy. I've gotten to the top and I want to stay there secure and all and won't reach back. So it doesn't create those biases there.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, and I'd love to hear from you, Tanika. I was part of a workshop yesterday where we were talking about that very thing. Sometimes even in the Black community, we get into position and we have to hold on to our position. We want to be the only person there. We don't reach back. And the guidance that was shared in the room is that even in the Black community, we really need to do more to be aware of the structures that are in place that make us believe that has to be the way, right? The structures that were not built for our equity. And some of the ways through the research that came up in which Black professionals are left out of opportunity through hiring practices are everything from homogeneous hiring panels, so no diversity, not having a seat at the table. Everybody at the hiring panel looks the same and unconscious bias comes in. Nepotism, right? And people not only will refer who they have commonality with, they will refer who they know and who they're in relationship with. And then we talked about also disregard for non-traditional qualifications, right? Like even though Black communities are highly educated, a lot of times people are looking for other things and they're not valuing experience gained through volunteer work or community service or entrepreneurship. But the biggest thing that came up, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Tanika, that shocked me was biased job descriptions. And I actually had to learn a little bit about this. And it talked about how job postings and even the words they use in the job postings are meant sometimes to discourage women or Black professionals or people from other marginalized groups from seeing themselves in that company or in that position and even applying. So we're talking about that kind of either hidden or unconscious bias that are keeping people excluded from even having an opportunity to apply. What do you think, Tanika?
I could talk about this all day. So I've been in positions where I've written job descriptions and I've been in positions where the job description doesn't match the position. And so they use blanket boilerplate language opposed to at the beginning of knowing that you have some position gap, actually thinking about what type of person we need in this role first, and then qualifications, because skills can be taught, behavior can be managed, but thinking, it must be inspired. And that's based on the company's culture. So one of my organizations have attorneys writing the job description. And it sounds like I wouldn't apply to here because I'm definitely not qualified just in the language and the word usage. And then there are times where it's 3 bullets and you're like, well, what am I going to do all day? Those are the hidden barriers and biases because they want you to be a catch-all. So whatever somebody else doesn't want to do in their position, they're going to dump it on you. So it's important for candidates when they're reading job descriptions, put your name in it. Tanika can, workforce development. Tanika, put your name in there. And if your name feels weird, something about it you need to change because in your mind, you're actually saying, oh, I have no project management skills. But you run a whole household with 5 kids, getting them up in the morning, checking your husband's calendar. That's project management. You have to think about your skills in a simplified way and say, oh, when that meeting got canceled and I had a doctor's appointment and my son had to be picked up, what did you do? You called your Nana, you called problem solving, troubleshooting. All of that, you have to think about your holistic skills, not just what's on paper, because you can have 5 degrees and they'll pick an intern because he's cheaper. It's those types of things that you have to be strong in knowing that, hey, it's something I have never done, but I can learn. How can I learn? Because in my undergrad, I had to take 16 courses and manage my time. Like the way you storytell about your skills also helps when you're looking for a job. So I know I hate filing. Don't give me anything that's mundane. I've scratched those off the list right away because if I'm going to just do the same thing every day, you're not going to get the best of me. You're going to get, oh my God, why am I doing this? So you have to be self-aware to know when you're looking through job descriptions and reading between the lines. If this company has had this job description up for 210 days, it's something going on internally that they can't find a person. It's a wealth of people looking for jobs and positions. So I always look at that. I look at how many times someone has applied. So if it's 2,000 applications, something's not right. They're looking for a great fit, and there is no such thing as a great fit. You manage and mold people according to your organizational values.
I'd love
And
to
if I
stay right
may add
here.
to
Oh, go
that,
ahead, Nat.
Christie,
Yes,
if
go
I
ahead.
may add to that too, what we've seen in terms of studies out there, you've seen resumes that are totally similar, but we discriminate based on the
Mhm.
name.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the name, and people will say, well, wait a minute, I've got everything that's equal. But that screener or that recruiter or the person that's setting up the entire talent acquisition aspect of it will look at the name and say, guess what? I don't want that person in here.
But let's stay there, and I'm glad you brought that up. I was going right there to it.
Okay.
Let's stay at this application process, right? And let's kind of walk the journey of a candidate and then get to some of the things that happen when you are an employee. If we're talking about, and we all know this to be true, applications being set aside or discarded just based on name, right? Like if you have ethnicity in your name, it is a screener that will exclude you from consideration. And now we hear a lot of organizations talking about blind applications, right? Where they've removed the name. Some of them even remove the address, right? Because knowing where you live might be a descriptor that prompts bias. And my question to that is, removing the name and removing the city and state to create fairness as opposed to fixing the mind and heart of the person that's screening the resumes, like, how does that work? Because I can remove my name, but my civic engagement or my community organizations are still going to tell you who I am. I went to an HBCU. That still is likely going to tell you who I am. And so why are we so focused on creating a semblance of fairness when what it really comes down to is that we have people who are committed to inequity evaluating the applications and resumes?
That's very true. My name is Tanika, so you know I'm not Scottish, right? So I use that as my strength. I'm like, I have diverse, I've overcome a lot of obstacles, I'm resilient, I'm on point, I don't cry in crises. I do all of that. And then I go a little bit up into my upbringing where most people's like, don't talk about where you're from. I'm from the east side of Baltimore. If anybody knows what the east side of Baltimore is like, if you survived and you're thriving, you have core skills how to make $1 out of 15 cents. So I take storytelling in who I am, not just my skills, because I can do that in my sleep. I want you to know who's going to show up for work every day. And when I career coach, I tell people, tell me something about yourself that nobody else knows. Use that and weave that into whatever the job descriptions say, and then you can get their attention because they probably interviewed 50 people before you. So you have to stand out in a way that it doesn't matter what the job descriptions say. I actually go to people's website and look, do they have high turnover? And then I use that as my talking pitch. Like, I'm the solution for your problem. But many people don't feel confident like that because they're like, oh, I gotta have this, I gotta
just
have
need the
that.
job. Yeah.
You just,
So
yeah,
in your cover letter, you're actually leaning into your Blackness and using it,
yes,
and identifying it as
yes,
a strength. And is your assumption that if they don't honor that, that is not a job you should be at?
yes. I
Okay.
will say no before I say yes, because I'm interviewing the company as well, because I don't want to dread getting up at work because Sally Mae over here doesn't like me because I got red braids. Like, I don't have time for that. Like, we're about the mission, we're about the work, and I'm results oriented. And I don't get into all of the biases of other people. I just check my own. So there are times when I'll look at a company and say, oh, they only have 4 people. They're going to work the crap out of me. And I have to check my own biases. You are the solution to that problem that can create efficiency. So although we are talking about, fairness, we have to be fair to ourselves. We need to check our own things. Am I good enough? I've never worked here. I've applied for Google and have no technology experience whatsoever, but I know something gifted inside of me could get that job. And I always get a first look, and then they're like, oh, we need you to have 20 years experience. I'm barely 20 myself. I know I look great. I'm barely 20 myself. Like, how you either want skills that you can teach, you still have to tell me the Google way, but I have the core competencies that you need. So I battle in interviews and I make it funny because I'm like, listen, I want to enjoy coming to work here. And first thing I say is, what's your culture? And they're like, oh, we're friendly, we're family oriented. Red flag for me. Because if you are any families bicker, they are vindictive. I want you to say that the culture is you can be whoever you want to be. There's no ceilings. You bring your genius. I look for that type of language, then I know I can thrive because I'm a creative and I'm not mundane. And when I teach my teens how to interview, I say, tell me about yourself. Well, my name is Darius, and I went to this high school. I said, no, tell them about your wit. Tell them about that you're a connector. Tell them about how you network and bring groups together. Like, they want to hear that, whether you're young or old. Like, what's in it for me? That's what I think about.
And let me rewind a little bit too, in terms of that whole process, because having been in that and seeing it with our organizations, we've got what we call the recruiter or the talent acquisition person. What I'm saying even earlier and echoing a little bit, first of all, when that resume or paperwork comes in, the application, whatever, because I can tell you right now too, our organization even had to fight on the application process. There are certain questions that they were asked in the beginning. So even before the interview, that bias comes in based on the culture of the organization, based on the actual screener of that organization. Because what you're talking about, Tanika, was the interviewing. I can get your resume there or that application and immediately screen you out, and you don't even get to the second step, because I'm looking at you and saying, okay, and I've seen it. I know how it's done. We'll look down the resume. All right, HBCU, nope. I'm not even going to move that to the next level, because here again, what I said earlier, like hires like screens like. So if there's certain things in there, when we talked about in the HR aspect of it, we want certifications. I understand when you're saying in terms of project management, but that screener will say, well, if I don't see anything that has project management certification, they go into the file 13, or what we call it, TB&T, thanks but no thanks. They go into that back bucket, and that's it. So again, when you get to that interview in there, I agree, do the homework. I advise my clients and all to find out the culture of the company, because that's very critical. Finding the culture of the company. Are they a progressive company? They may not be, and they may not have the people, the gatekeepers out there. HR is somewhat been called the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper of keeping that company's culture as how that person defines it and how the culture of the company defines it. We're going to be this type of a company. And that gatekeeper, along with middle management and senior management, creates the culture of the type of people that they are looking for. This is one why, when we said earlier, affirmative action, we want to get people at the table. We want to also look at diversity, equity, inclusion. We want to see people at the table. We want to make sure that if there's a name there, that doesn't immediately pushes them off the consideration table. So we find that all those little nuances are in there. And you talk about unconscious bias, implicit bias, stereotypes, and all, they all are at the table in the beginning when I'm looking for that person. My perception of, Christy, who's the best person that looks like me and who's not the best person, who may be qualification wise, but doesn't look like me to be the best person. So I bring that bias. We all bring those biases to the table. The question is, can I push that aside and say, let me interview this person, because based on what I'm seeing in their application or in their resume, this person basically may be a very good fit for our company.
I love the whole concept of understanding the culture of an organization and making your decision based on that, because there are different frames of thought here. And I often talk to other organizations that do racial equity work. And there's one in particular where the gentleman said to me, sometimes there are some people who want to build better plantations. And I was like, right?
Yep.
Like some of us, right, we're indoctrinated in take that culture off your resume, make it as whitewashed as possible so that they will call you. When we sell in your house, we're told, take your pictures and your ornaments and stuff down that speak to the fact that you're Black, because that's the only way you can sell it. And for so many, I think, decades and generations, we've been told that assimilation is the only way to be successful. And I'm hearing here that that's one way. right? To be palatable and to meet the standards of a culture of an organization that's looking for that. But I'm also hearing, which I'm very excited about, the concept of empowerment where we're not forcing ourselves into situations that don't want us. Instead, we're leading with the culture. We're leading with, our ethnicity, and we are placing value on it in a way that an organization will accept it on its face for what it is or won't. And I love that there are two ways to approach it. And I love that I'm hearing a little bit of a transition. There was a time that I wouldn't go to an interview with my hair like this, right? Because I felt like my hair had to be straight and I had to conform. And I can't tell you one time that I conformed and whitewashed and then got into the role and was super successful, right? Because however you get in is what you have to do to keep, and we'll talk about that journey a little bit further. So we've talked a little bit about resumes and applications. I want to talk about the interview process, because another thing that came up in the research is that unstructured interviews lend themselves to inequity. And it made me think, because I'm part of an organization where they were interviewing for a top level position. And I remembered hearing that the hiring manager was interviewing like kind of sporadically, like one person interviewed on Zoom, and then the next person had an in-person interview and there were members of the staff there. And then the third person got taken to lunch. And then it's like, when there's no standardization, it really does disrupt the opportunity for specifically Black people to have equal opportunity. What are we thinking about the interview process and how that is so subjective and
let me
harms
say
Black
this.
people?
Yeah, when you say this, when you look at the interviewing process, because I do a lot of training in that regard, there's different types of interviewing. When you're going for, let's say, government positions and all, you've got the panel interview. You've got the 3 panelists out there, and the questions are generally standard. Back to your analogy or your example, if that's happening, I would tell you right now, as Tanika would say, you're interviewing a company, and if that's happening, I'm out of here. I will tell anybody that if they're so disjointed, then that's the culture of the company. And you really want to, if you want to go in there and change that, if you're a change agent person, that's a different story. But if you're walking in there thinking, oh, this is so disorganized, yes, seeing is believing. What you get when you go in there is going to be the exact same thing. So red flag goes up, you're interviewing, no, I don't think this is what I really want. Bye, and move on to something that's a lot more structured, and that they take a lot of time in terms of making sure they've got the right persons doing the interviewing. Because that's a reflection, as we mentioned earlier, the culture of the company. Do they take enough time to say, look, we've got to put together a very structured interviewing, onboarding process and all. We value that because that employee is going to be an essential employee, whether or not he or she is at a senior level position or a non-senior level position. So again, when you walk in there on that interview, you evaluate that interviewing process. And that's what I would stress to every person that's on here. You're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you. And those subcultures, those little signs that they give you indicates how well organized they are in the actual employment recruitment process.
Tanika?
Yes, to add on to that, I'm gonna tell you a funny story. I was interviewing for a director of operations position, and everything went well. They got back to me right away, and then they scheduled a time. They rescheduled 3 times. So on the 3rd time, I wrote back and said, I have other opportunities that are a priority right now. And when you get opportunities to come back and talk to me, we'll do it then. And I respectfully declined, because there should be so much forethought, even once you select the candidates, who's meeting in like, I'm sorry, said it should be consistent. Like, you shouldn't take me to lunch and then one of my girlfriends, interview, and you do her Zoom 30 minutes and you spent all day with me. I think that also goes to hires like they'll spend more time with you. I'm very time conscious when I'm interviewing, because I like to talk. So I make sure I answer the question, and then normally there's a follow-up question. And then when we get to the end, you got 2 minutes to even get any type of information about the position. Why is it vacant? Any of that. So I try to be clear and concise in my answers, and then we can leave the fluff for later. And if I see that people who don't even have my resume or haven't highlighted sections, I just look around where people just sit there with nothing. I'm like, you don't even know who I am. And then I know I can kill the interview because you don't even know what to expect. Or the positions change. What position are you interviewing for? Those are red flags. You're not prepared for me, and I didn't stayed up all night reading your annual report, and you're not prepared for me. I feel like that's disrespectful as well. And then I had another incident where I was doing the interviewing, and the person was interviewing in their car while they were driving. And my first thought was, I'm checking my biases, right? Maybe something happened, pull over, whatever. So I kept saying, are you safe? And they were like, yeah, at the red light, I'm gonna pull over. And I inserted humor, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, you're gonna be racing in, you're gonna be late, you're gonna leave your stuff, like prepare. You wanna be calm, you wanna be centered, you wanna put your best foot forward. So I've been on both sides. But the one thing is you cannot fake authenticity. It's gonna show up. So I don't sleep at night, so I don't ever take a job that has 8 o'clock meetings because my brain isn't even functioning. And I'm really upfront in interviews. I'm like, our meeting, I'm just waking up and you're not gonna give my best self. And they appreciate the honesty, but I'll stay late. Like, you need somebody to go past 6, I'm here. You need somebody to come in and pick up, I'm there. I give them both sides. It's not a deficit for me because I'm
No,
self-aware.
I'm not gonna share that at the interview. I'm gonna wait till I get in and tell that.
No, I shared at the interview because if they say, oh, you have to be here at 7:30, I'm checking it off my list because I'm not gonna function at my highest self. And one of the things, you can't be afraid to walk away. Like, we are
Yeah,
all
yeah.
needing money, but you are not desperate. There are a million jobs that need someone just like you. And I take that mentality in. You need me just as much as I need you. And salary negotiations, I could spend all day with that. I'm gonna go back and forth because it's not that it can take me 10 minutes to do something, but it took me 4 years of school to learn how to do that 10 minutes. And no one can really pay you your value. But if you tell me it's a range from 50 to 100K, you're not giving me 52. I'm not entry level. So also understanding, the type of time you put into your own craft and what you offer. If you have data of you save the company 20% or these things, because people want to know, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. So I've been in some crazy situations, but my gut never lies to me. And I can tell if a person is a hard worker or they're just a fast talker.
And I may add to that, Christy, two things that Tanika talked about. One, I advise the clients also to have what I call a job acceptance criteria. You sit down and determine what are your job acceptance criteria. One, it could be location. Number two, it could be also, for an example, the salary. Well, I don't get into the actual salary per se. I talk about the overall compensation package. So again, my line right now is talking to people that are looking at mid and senior level positions where we talk about not just the salary, but the overall executive compensation. So that's a whole different ballpark there. But I go back to job acceptance criteria, upward mobility, location, type of company. So those things change over time. But you've got to have a job acceptance criteria to sit down and determine, okay, does this particular position, if I'm offered that, chances of advancement, that's an acceptance criteria. And if it's not, and sometimes, and most of the time, your questions are geared toward your job acceptance criteria. And it changes over time because your experiences change, your skill sets change. So again, what Tanika was saying earlier, you're interviewing the company, and because you've got to see if it's a good fit for you, not just for the company, but it's a good fit for you. And we're going back to the interviewing process. All right, questions. If I'm hired, what do you expect from me the first 30 days, first 60 days, the first 90 days? And if they don't have it clearly defined for you, then it goes back. That company really has not spent enough time to do several things. One, structure their entire employment process. Number two, train their interviewers on effective interviewing, because there's different types. Like I said, the panel interviewing, companies are also looking at behavioral interviewing. We're looking at phone interviewing and all those types of interviewing styles. So you've got to really find out what's good for you, because going after the money is not everything.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get in there, can you contribute, and do they value you as a contributing employee? So you ask those pre-questions in there. And if they don't have the answers to that, or say, oh, that's a great answer, let me get back to you. As you said, Tanika, if they don't get back to you in a prescribed time, even on the job offer or whatever, again, and particularly in this economy, there's enough jobs out here, folks, that you can be what I call, again, a free agent.
Okay.
Have skills, will travel.
So there are a lot of detriments to unfair hiring practices to Black communities. And we know, we talked about the racial wealth gap. We are excluded from economic opportunities. We know that there is a woeful underrepresentation in leadership and C-suite CEO positions, decision-making positions, but there's also the impact on mental health, right? I can remember a time that I was in a position and I actually referred a friend of mine, a white male, I've talked about this before, and he came to the job at my recommendation, and I was tasked with training him. And I spent about 3 months training him. I had been there for about 1.5 years before him. And in conversation, I found out that he made a lot more money than I did. And I remember the impact on my mental health, really, that reality sinking in, that was a thing, that was a possibility, and addressing it and being told that the needs of the company were different at the time that he was hired, and that's why. So these things also have an impact on our mental health, and more importantly, it has an impact on Black professionals' confidence and how you show up at the next opportunity. And that's when we start to feel the desperation, right? Because we don't feel valued. And that's when we start taking whatever is offered to us because we feel like that's all we're worth. So let's talk about, talk about a little bit about that.
Because you hit a note. I work for a company, and won't mention their name, a major corporation, major company. And my boss left the company to another job. And our job responsibilities were exactly the same, but only one line separate us in terms of a manager and a director. And that job line was, that person prepares the budget for that department. Well, guess what? He had left the company. So that responsibility was left up to me. So I satisfied that one category on that. Now I'm up for director of employment. They immediately said, well, we'll consider you. Okay. We're going to open it up. They hired a guy who was in the company, but he was stationed in Hawaii. Brought him in and wanted me to train him. Chrissy, I said, sorry, I don't do that. 3 weeks later, I'm gone and I'm with another company. So sometimes you got to make, now, I'm not saying that's going to be happening in all cases, but sometimes you got to make a decision. I'm not training a guy that's going to be my boss. I'm sorry. You got to make to thine own self be true. Then once I found out that they were considering him, I got on my network and said, look here, I am now declaring myself as a free agent who is out here. And I immediately, within probably 3 or 4 weeks later, after he came on board, I submitted my resignation and said, I'm out of here. I'm relocating to another city. Bye.
Wow.
So, and particularly now, again, I'm going to stress it again. When we're looking at an economy that's hiring all the time, the word that was in the chat, free agency, you got to have these, you got the skills. You're going to break down these barriers because there are companies out here that are going to hire people of color, get away from that bias. We've looked at that as a national HR organization. We've identified some of those companies that are what I call definitely diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is what they're practiced, not just talk, but they're walking the walk. And guess what? That is a legitimate question that I would ask during the interview. If you're looking at that company's board of directors, their C-suite people, and who's up there, you ask that question. What's your position on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if they give you this story of, well, that's just the general story out here as far as, you know, the platitude, demonstrate that to me. Do you have people in your organization that you could call on? Or if they don't have a diverse interviewing panel, again, that sends up a sign. So again, I can't stress enough, you're going to hear me use that term a lot of times, free agency, free agency.
I want to get to what candidates and well, actually corporations and employers can do to move away from this type of behavior. But before that, I just want to list some of the protections, legal protections that exist. I can't say that I know that all of these legal protections are meant to protect us, but there is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that prohibits discrimination. Of course, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, most of us know that. I know that I was supporting someone, an employee who had experienced harm here in Maryland, who filed a claim, and they were over 8 months backed up. She had to continue to wait so long that she just gave up on her claim altogether. So I'll say that. Of course, the Americans with Disabilities Act is meant to make sure that candidates with disabilities are given fair consideration. And then there's fair chance hiring laws that are supposed to remove certain boxes from applications, right? Remove questions about criminal history and prior convictions, which are meant to disproportionately disinclude Black people's access to employment. So we can get into that, but I really want to know, what do you think employers and companies who want to do better can do? We're not in agreement necessarily with just taking the names off the resumes. That's not a good fix. What can they do to safeguard against not just this type of harm on the front end, but when the people get in the roles, to give them access to opportunity? What should they be doing? Tanika?
I think one, they should do audits. Like Mr. Nat said, if your whole board is Caucasian, something's wrong. There are brilliant African-American people here who's doing it right. Even on the flip side, they're entering diversity in every single sector of their business. And diversity is just not a color. Diversity is thinking styles, behavior. Are you strategic? Are you analytical? You should actually audit your team to see if you're having the same problems in your business. It's because you don't have the right thinkers at the table, the right actionary people. Like, you need to have someone who can do it, someone who could think it, someone who can execute it, and then you have someone who celebrates it, because that's important, celebrating the wins. And then you have those, what I call myself, I look for problems because I'm a problem solver. I can find holes in processes that people don't even think about. And I'm like, if we did it this way, this would streamline, and then the results will be different. So I value that I'm critical, because I'm looking at all the documentation, the policies, procedures, and I'm looking at the body language of the staff, like what's going on, because they talk, right? So, you know, long time ago, you're not supposed to discuss your salaries, but it's actually a law that they put salary ranges on job descriptions. And you're not surprised when you have a master's degree and they're offering you $17. Like, it should be fair and compulsory with the actual role. Also, companies can benchmark. There are companies that are doing amazing work in the DEI area, like Under Armour. I mean, I can name a few of them that are doing it right. Set up a meeting. What do you do? How do you do it? You know, what are best practices? Where were your pitfalls? Like, what was the biggest disaster that happened when you did a failed hire? Like, was it personal? Was it process? Like, understanding where the holes are to fix them and not being ashamed about it. Like, the CEO before you could have had certain preferences that you inherited, and you're getting pushback because you see the gap. Other organizations can train. We're not perfect. Sometimes, like the unconscious bias, like, get the training so people won't have any excuse to say, well, we've always done it this way. That doesn't mean we got to continue to do this way. The other thing that they can do is get new ideas. I love when there are like consortium of entrepreneurs because they have all these bright ideas, but then how do you streamline that so it can be universal? And listen, active listening, listen to what your staff say, what your customers say. I love the show where the CEOs go undercover.
Oh, undercover, yes.
Yes, and they go and really realize like that their organization is trash to their employees. Like those type of things, like get in the groundwork. The executives are hired to be executives because you're high level, but you got to know what's going on all the way down to the mailroom because it affects the whole organization. But I can go on and on. I'll let Nat jump in.
I would add to that too, when you start evaluating companies and you mentioned companies like Under Armour and all, I would say to that prospective employee or candidate, look at the company overall. What I advise now, a national organization, when we start looking at companies that we're going to target as great places to work, one of the things that we look at is, Tanika said, the board of directors, their senior staff, but also outside of that, their advertising. Are they diverse in their advertising? I always point out one company that's in Cincinnati that we are looking at and saying that they almost are the gold standard, Procter & Gamble. When you look at Procter & Gamble, when they're advertising all their consumer products, it's a diverse or diverse people there that they're showing. And I say diverse, not just ethnicity, but gender. We're looking at LGBTQ. That's what we look at in terms of all of that, in terms of this whole mosaic of diversity. So if you've got a company that's walking the walk, not just talk, the walk is, I'm in the community, the diverse community. I support some of these issues out here that are possibly against some of the other companies on the right side there, but I support total diversity, race, ethnic, gender, all of those. Here's what we're doing, and we support it in this way. We advertise, we're in the community. We've got ERGs, employee resource groups, that give us those indications that, hey, are we doing the right thing? We're also translating that maybe in Spanish. We're translating that in a different language. So they're very conscious. When you got unconscious bias, no, we've got conscious diversity. We've got people in our organization that are helping the company grow, because statistics show when you're a diverse organization, your profits go up. If you're in a profit-making organization, if you're not, and we can give you the companies that are not in that case. And I got one in particular that's going out there and total bankruptcy, but you're looking at that company as a whole, because we said earlier, that's the culture of the company, that we're going to be a company of all. And we don't just talk it, we walk it. We've got people in the community. We're doing outreach. When we advertise our company, we're sensitive to all the needs of that particular organization that we represent. So I go back to what we said earlier. Please examine the culture of the company, because everyone in that company from the top down to the middle affects the entire culture. So when we talk about inequity, yes, we see it out there. And I'll throw this out here now. I am so happy that the WNBA, for an example, is filing a grievance saying, hey, you got all this money coming in now, pay us what we're worth. Pay us now. This is the WNBA. Hey, we got them out here, Angel Reese and others making money outside, but pay us enough that we don't have to go overseas to augment our salary. That's what we're talking about, is that activism in there. And the WNBA has a social activism in there. So, and understand that's a sport, but that sport is a business. And they've got people in there that are owners and all that are very sensitive. So again, bringing it back, it's the culture of the company, what they're doing to their consumers. You want to buy the product, what they're advertising, what they're doing in the community. Are they socially conscious to what they're involved in the business?
So I'm sorry that we're coming up on time, but I want to leave by asking you guys to give some advice to those who are on, who may be Black professionals who are not only navigating how and when it's right to get in the door, but what it's like to be in the door, be in a job, and see yourself being marginalized from opportunity. Because fair hiring practices extend themselves into unfair employment behaviors once people are in their roles. So I would love each of you, and we'll start with Nat and then end with Tanika, to just give our audience some advice on how employees or candidates should advocate for themselves for fairness in the workplace, either at the candidate stage or when they're in the job.
Well, this may take a little bit of a slant, but I would say, one, find yourself a mentor. Find yourself a mentor inside of that company. And even ask, do they have a mentoring program? You can ask that, because a lot of progressive companies will have that. So you're in there navigating that, find yourself a mentor. If there's unfair practices in there, yes, go to that HR department in there and share that. Because what I always say, you want to have a very positive work environment, not a toxic work environment. And companies now are very sensitive to that type of environment that they want to create. So find yourself a mentor. If you can't get it inside, get it outside, because the navigation is going to be very critical for your success in there. The mental health, have an outside support group that's not in the company, but you can go to and let your hair down and go, oh, okay, here's my mental health that I'm dealing with. And last but not least, sometimes know when you got to leave.
Sounds good. Tanika, love to hear from you.
Awesome. I'll start with the candidates. Believe in yourself. You have walked the walk, talked the talk, you are learning, and every day we should learn something different. Thirdly, be prepared. Be prepared for the hard questions. If it's something that you're unsure about in your background that you don't want to talk about, practice talking about it in a positive way, because we all have grown from a place of no knowledge to a lot of knowledge, and it's going to continue. Also, do some soul searching when you're thinking about positions. I remember people were like, "Oh, Tanika, you bounce around." I said, because when I'm not valued, I leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's a core principle. If
Yeah.
I leave worn out and I'm always under promising and over delivering, and you don't even acknowledge my birthday, or I'm sick and I still have to work sick, like I look for opportunities, one, to grow. And in that, every job I've ever had, I've learned a skill. And if I'm missing, I remember I missed out. I was one of two. I'm always one of two in the interviewing pool. And I asked for feedback. So I went back to the CEO and I said, well, what were the things in my resume or in my interview that, didn't gel with what you were looking for? And they was like, oh, you've never supervised anybody. Had I known that, I'm always an informal supervisor. You talk about training, you're training your next person, your teammates, and sometimes your replacement. That's a form of leadership and responsibility. I've done timesheets, so I had to craft my knowledge. I said, aha, I got it. You want the title, but I'm going to give you my tasks, the things that my responsibilities that equal to a title. I may not have ever been a vice president, but I've done vice president things. Also, know, like Mr. Nat said, know your kill switch. Like if your gut says something feels crazy, ask the receptionist, and then go and ask the person who's been there the longest, like, what has the change been like? Was it volatile? Was it, easy? Is technology? Was it, what kind of things that they're not talking about? I'll wait for people in the parking lot that's leaving and say, hey, how do you like working here? Like, you could do informal, your own data thing. And as far as organizations, I think you need to start, at the top, including evaluations with your current staff. Like, everybody has personality differences. So the people who make the squeaky noise normally have their own agenda, but your diehard employees, go and say, how did you feel when you came to work sick? What types of things can we do? Like, one time I made a suggestion to bring in puzzles because people are so stressed out. Like, on that lunch break, we don't want to do work on our lunch break. I want to go color. So I add fun. I had a little color corner, and people enjoy that. I found that they kept disrupting me because they wanted my candy and where's your bubbles and your whistles and stuff like that. But when you interject that part of childlike manner, people will work harder for you. You don't have to force it. And also for organizations, like, read the room. Like I say that all the time, read the room. If you're in staff meetings that's going an hour and 35 minutes, people are burnt out. They stopped listening 30 minutes ago. Take breaks. Only have short agendas so you can get done and have some results, opposed to I leave out of a meeting, I got 10 things to do. I'm not gonna be able to do this. So then that's stressing me out. Mental health. Have a place where you can just be you and leave work if you can at work. Have moments, because we're all like cross generational, like you can't turn work off. Put your phone down, go outside, like just mental and physical things. Pray. I had to pray a lot. Sometimes I pray out loud so people know I'm praying, so I don't, end up formally incarcerated. So it's things like that, you got to take care of yourself, because you're no good to anyone if you're not good to yourself.
Well, I love all of that advice. There's a question in the chat that asks about any formal ways to navigate and expose organizations who are doing the wrong thing. And so some of the advice that we had was to make sure that you're documenting everything. You can file internal complaints. Certainly, when it works properly, there's the EEOC. And there are community advocacy groups and professional associations who exist to help you navigate equity challenges in the workplace. And they can help, provide you with resources on navigating that journey. Thank you, Tanika. Thank you, Nat, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Next month in November, we will be talking about equity and performance evaluations. We know that is the next step from what we discussed today, to talk about how whole communities are marginalized from access to opportunity because of bias in performance evaluations. So please join us at November's Equity at Work. For Associated Black Charities, I am Chrissy Thornton. See you soon.
Thank you.